Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this Go for Growth webinar on finding opportunities in the public sector on Tuesday, the 18th of February 2025. I'll just give it a couple of seconds while people are joining us. We've got plenty of people signed up for today. So thank you to everyone who's here for taking time out of what I'm sure are really busy calendars. Whilst we're letting people join, I'll just go through what we're covering today. So we're going to cover, I'll do a quick introduction to me in a second. We're going to cover really briefly why public sector contracts can be a real positive mechanism for sustained growth, especially for smaller businesses. I'll look at the process. So what does this whole end-to-end process look like? And then we'll focus in on where to find opportunities. I'm going to do a live demonstration, hopefully if the tech works, to find a tender service. And I'm going to cover what changes we might see that comes out of the new regulations, some information that you might want to consider around finding and then bidding for opportunities, and also just a quick brief coverage at the end of what the free support offer is from Go for Growth. So please do feel free to ask questions throughout the session today. The chat functionality should be enabled. The Q&A functionality is enabled. I will keep an eye on both as we go. I have carved out some time for questions at the end, but please don't feel like you have to wait. You can ask questions as we crack on today. As you can see on the screen, the session is being recorded today. So a copy of the recording will be available via our YouTube channel. It will also be sent out with the slide deck today. And as I say, all the slides will be sent out to all registered attendees. So if you want to make notes as you're going, please do feel free, but don't feel like you have to. You will get everything that you see on screen, and any live links that are in there will also be live for you to click through when we get to it. So quick intro from me. You might have been to a Go for Growth webinar before, so you might know who I am. I'm Gillian Askew. I'm one of 3 co-founders of Go for Growth. Go for Growth is a micro social enterprise. So we are a business for good. We're funded by our public sector contracting authority clients who are leading the way in investing into being open for business, developing the marketplace, and being inclusive, especially for smaller organisations and the voluntary sector. My background is in procurement, so I've been in procurement for 30 years. Almost now an equitable split between private sector and public sector. And I'm a long-standing micro business owner. So I say that only really to demonstrate that I've walked a mile in both pairs of shoes. So I know what it is like as a commissioning organisation, putting procurements out into the marketplace. And I also know firsthand what it's like to answer those procurements as a business. So that's me. That's what I've been up to for the past 30 years. And we'll crack on into the webinar this morning. So I'm not going to dwell too much on this actually, but I always feel like it can be quite relevant and timely just to have a quick reminder of why the public sector could be a really good place for smaller organisations to consider growing. And there's 2 lenses to this. So you can bid directly with the public sector to own a contract in your own right, or as part of a collaboration or consortia, that kind of thing, in a partnership, for example. But also you might work for the public sector through the supply chain. So you might actually contract with a principal contractor who owns the contract directly with the public sector, and you might subcontract through them. All of those avenues to supplying the public sector are great. What we're trying to do in Go for Growth is give smaller organisations access to the right resources, support, to build knowledge and confidence, so that if you want to place a bid directly to the public sector, that you've got everything that you need in your toolkit to be able to do so. And the last government set a mandate to place at least 33% of all spend with small to medium enterprises and deliver public good. So public good is often termed social value in the public sector. There is something called the Public Services Act, or the Social Value Act, which was assented to law actually in January 2013. The Act was enacted in 2012. So this notion from all public sector organisations that they need to think about the social and economic impact of every pound that they spend of taxpayers' money isn't a new concept. And it's a big market, the public sector. It's worth nearly 300 billion a year, just under. I mean, it's also a stable market. Of course, we see a lot in the news about public service cuts. And they are real. So, you know, they're not media hype. However, the total value of that public sector rarely moves around too significantly. So it's a huge market, and there is a good degree of stability in the public sector market. So for smaller organisations, contracts can last 4 years, and under the new regulations, up to 8 years. Frameworks can last. Dynamic purchasing systems, and they will evolve into dynamic markets under the new regulations. They can last up to 10 years. So there can be some real positives around working for the public sector. There is something called the National Procurement Policy Statement. If you go to gov.uk and look for the National Procurement Policy Statement, it was released just last week, but it is reinforcing actually the new government's mission-driven government's desire to support the marketplace. So the National Procurement Policy Statement effectively describes what's important to every public procurement activity that goes out. So what it's talking about in brief is supporting SMEs and voluntary sector organisations, VCSEs, voluntary community social enterprises, not-for-profit charity organisations, and small to medium enterprises. And that includes sole traders and micro businesses also, so that 0 to 9 employees, small businesses are 0 to 49 employees. Tackling things like carbon reduction is important to this government, and also building skills both in the procurement community but also in the marketplace. So the things that you see on screen are outcomes of all of those things. So we're trying to build resilience for the future. The public sector wants to be accessible to all organisations. And you'll hear something about anchor strategy. If you come to plenty of Go for Growth webinars, you'll hear me talk about anchor institutions and anchor strategy. Lots of public sector organisations are rooted in a place, and so they have a civic responsibility to think about how they develop the local economy in which they reside and serve. And of course, although COVID might feel like it was a lifetime ago, the devastation of COVID is still with us today from a very human, actually, but also a business perspective. And so public sector contracts can be a really useful way of coming back from the global pandemic. Thank you to whoever, thank you, Paul, for putting that link to the National Procurement Policy Statement in the chat. That's really useful. Thank you ever so much. Let me move on. In terms of the process, one of the useful things, I guess, about the public sector is that, and especially over threshold, and for those that aren't familiar with what threshold means, the regulations kick in at a certain value. Currently, for goods and services, which might concern most people on the webinar today, that, including VAT, that value is 214,904. If you're in construction and you're thinking about build, a works contract, the limit is around 5.4 million. And then there's something called the light touch regime, which really concerns things like social care, which is just over 634,000, I think the value is. They're all inclusive of VAT. And what those thresholds effectively mean is if the total contract value over the life of the contract is going to be above that level, then the regulations are enforced. They're in play. And therefore, there is a level of consistency to how the public sector works. Now, often small businesses are working at a much lower level than even the goods and services threshold of 214,000, just shy of 215. You know, we might be working in tens of thousands rather than hundreds of thousands. Under that threshold, every public sector organisation will effectively publish their own set of rules as to what process they'll use at what level. So it might be that up to 10,000, for example, they just seek a minimum of 3 quotes. And they might not advertise that on things like Contracts Finder. They don't have to advertise anything on the Finder tender service, and I'll get to that until we're over threshold. But it might be that at, say, up to 25,000, between 10 and 25,000, they are going to run a competitive process, and it will be advertised and open for everyone to see. But if you're working at that lower level, whoever you identify your customer, your aspired customer to be, they will have their own set of rules. They're sometimes called contract procedure rules. They will be public-facing documents on their organization's website that says, here's the process that we'll use at these value levels. But typically what you'll see, and especially when we're above the threshold, is this process that you see on the screen. So there is much more focus on engaging the market early at the minute. So pre-market engagement, so before the competition or quote goes live, actually engaging the market to understand the capability and capacity and get feedback from the market. So something called a PIN, which is under the current regulations, a prior information notice, and there's something called an RFI, which is a request for information. So there are different mechanisms that the public sector might use to engage the market before actually it wants to put either a quote process or a competitive tender out into the market. And our advice would be, if you see those opportunities and you have time to engage with them, they can be really useful, A, for influencing what eventually comes out into the market, but also getting a relationship with that potential customer. Usually, and especially above threshold, there'll be some sort of advertisement. If we're above threshold, that will be on the Finder tender service. And I'll talk to you a little bit about that in a second. But there'll be some sort of invitation to tender in that advertisement. So if it's an RFQ, which is a request for quotation, all of the mechanisms of how you go about answering that tender would be in the invitation. And if it's an actual competitive tender, it would be called an ITT, an invitation to tender. You've then got something called the Standard Selection Questionnaire or Selection Questionnaire, SSQ or SQ. If we're above threshold, there are certain, I think there's 7 or 8 sections in the Selection Questionnaire, 8, I think, at the minute. And depending on what kind of process that is, some or all of that Standard Selection Questionnaire will be in there. And the Selection Questionnaire is really looking at you as a business. So it will be asking you about your financial and economic standing. So it might ask for some demonstration of how your business has been performing. It's changing under the regulations, but commonly at the minute you would see a request for 2 years worth of accounts or a link to Companies House if you are a registered organisation at Companies House. If you can't do that, or if you're a new startup, for example, you would be able to give cash flow forecast or P&L forecast, that kind of thing. It'll also look at your capability, your technical competence. So it might ask you for up to 3 contract examples where you've done this before, and it's up to 3, so 1 would suffice. If you're a new startup or you're diversifying and you haven't done this before, there's a 500-word box that you can fill in that gives you an opportunity to talk about your capability if you haven't won contracts before. But it will be looking at you as a business. So it will be thinking about your licenses, your accreditations, your insurances, how you do business as a business. And it's about how you are made up as a business. Also in that selection questionnaire are things like grounds for exclusion. And there are 2 types of exclusion, mandatory and discretionary. A mandatory exclusion would be something like if you have been charged with an offence under labour laws, for example, or fraud, that kind of thing. And a discretionary exclusion might be something like an environmental breach. If you have fallen foul of a mandatory exclusion, almost certainly that would mean you wouldn't be able to continue in the process. If it's a discretionary exclusion, it will be, as it says on the tin, at the discretion of the contracting authority. And you'll see those things in that Standard Selection Questionnaire. In every procurement, regardless of value, there'll be some sort of specification, and it does exactly what it says on the tin. It tells you what the contracting authority is trying to buy and what it wants to buy and what's important to it. And it'll tell you how they will award the business. So how they're going to score what your bid submission or quote looks like, called an evaluation criteria. And sometimes there are weightings in there. So some questions might be pass-fail, or something called threshold questions, where if you don't meet the threshold, you can't continue. But there will also be weightings in there. So question 1 might have 50% weighting, question 2 might have 30% weighting, question 3 might have 20% weighting, that kind of thing. So it allows you to see where to put most of your effort based on priorities. There'll be quality, technical and pricing questions, and often social value questions will form part of that quality or technical question set. And then, of course, there are legal terms and conditions, and there's also a feedback process. So if you are unsuccessful, and even if you're successful, what you should get is feedback to tell you what your score was in comparison to the winning bidder's score. And certainly above threshold, you should get detailed feedback as to where the gaps were in your bid response. And under the new regulations, it's something called an assessment summary, and it's designed to help bidders to improve for next opportunities. Under threshold, there's less requirement for the public sector organisation to give detailed feedback under the law. But that doesn't mean that we don't encourage detailed feedback to be given. You can see on this slide that 4, 5, 7 and 8 are underlined in blue, and that's because there's a live link in there to the 2024 Lunch and Learn sessions that we did last March on those 4 topics. You can, of course, go to our website or our Eventbrite page, because we've got the same Lunch and Learn sessions happening again this March. If you would like to come along to a live session, they will also be recorded as well. I think I'll just check if there's anything in the chat. So I wanted to show you this transparency notice. I think it's important for businesses who are looking for opportunities. What you see on the left-hand side is the current regulations, which are called the PCR 15, Public Contract Regulations of 2015. So these are the current notices that in law each contracting authority has to register. And again, please remember that these are enforceable above threshold, so above that 214,904. What you see in the middle is the notice transparency regime under the new regulations, the Procurement Act 2023. The Procurement Act 2023 for the uninitiated come into force on the 24th of this month. So as of midnight plus 1 minute on the 24th of February, so as soon as we turn into the 24th, any procurements that are going live under the new regulations, all of these notices will apply. What we will have, of course, is 2 concurrent set of regulations. So up to close of, I guess, midnight on the 23rd of February, anything that is either live or is let up until that point will be governed for the lifetime of the contract under the Public Contract Regs of 2015. And that includes dynamic purchasing systems that can last up to 10 years. It can also include frameworks that might last up to 4 years. Anything that is let from the 24th of February will be under the new regulations. So we will have this train track of concurrent regulations. But this transparency notice, I think, is important for us as businesses, because actually you can see at the top end a pipeline notice, a planned procurement notice, a preliminary market engagement notice. You can see that there is a really big focus on letting the market know what's coming. Now, it comes with some caveats. So the pipeline notice in the regulation says the total contract value of 2 million and above, it must be on your pipeline, and you must publish a pipeline notice. Good practice, I think, would suggest, and this is certainly in conversations I'm having with contracting authorities, is that their pipelines themselves will go down to a much lower value than 2 million. But it is worth noting that pipeline notices will only be relevant when it's above 2 million. That's my understanding of it. So you wouldn't expect necessarily to see a pipeline notice for an opportunity of 30,000, something like that. But what we should see is more engagement with the marketplace before things are happening. And if you are planning on subcontracting to an opportunity, that can be just as important as if you're wanting to bid for that directly. And there's a real logic to the transparency regime. So we can see the movement all the way through the contract, including things like contract performance notices, payments compliance notice. So public sector is really on the hook for showing publicly what's happening at every stage of the contract, including contract termination. And contract change notices. So we'll have much more transparency and much more ability to see what's going on in public sector procurement than we have under the current regulations. And the good news is it will all be in one place, and I'll talk to you about that in a second. So as it stands today, and we have a couple of weeks before the procurement regulations go live, as it stands today, these are where you can find opportunities. So for England, there are a couple. The Find a Tender service is high value tenders above that threshold that I talked about. So for wider public sector, 214,904, it is lower in central government. I think it is 138,000, something like that. We'll see in a second when we go into it. And then there's Contracts Finder, which is typically for central government over 10,000, excluding VAT, and for wider public sector over 25,000, excluding VAT. And both of those are freely provided search engines. If you're a provider Scotland, Public Contracts Scotland, Sell to Wales, eTenders NI for Northern Ireland. And then if you are looking at central government, you could look at Bravo Solution also. All of those links are live. So please do feel free to have a play around with those. I'm going to do a really quick demonstration today of the Find a Tender service. And I'll explain why in a second. What we will have under the regulations, so from the 24th of February, what we will have is something called the Central Digital Platform. The Central Digital Platform, it will be an extension of the Find a Tender service. So what I show you in the FTS today, Find a Tender service, you will see that, but with the new developments of Central Digital Platform when it goes live on the 24th of February. And it actually, for the first time, pushes everything into one place. And again, this is above threshold. So all notices will be published on the Central Digital Platform. Procurement pipelines will be there. Supplier registers will be there. Any KPI reporting, data management will be in there. I attended a call recently. So the registration to the Central Digital Platform is mandatory for both public sector organisations and suppliers. If you want to bid anything in the public sector from the 24th of February, you will need to be registered to the Central Digital Platform. My understanding, and we haven't seen it yet, my understanding is that you can search for opportunities on there without a registration, but what you can't do is interact with any opportunities. What we will do in Go for Growth, as soon as it's live on the 24th, as we have with other portals, we'll create a tutorial video and a step-by-step guide of how to register to the Central Digital Platform, how to search for opportunities on there. And there is something in there called the Supplier Information System. So we'll be able to enter some of our standard details, and in the fullness of time, our insurance policies, our accreditations, our registrations, licenses, all of that grand stuff. But we'll be able to fill out effectively part of that standard selection questionnaire, and that information will be automatically pulled through to the individual procurement portals. They're called eSender units, I think. So what that's trying to do is stop that duplication of effort that we have as bidders. So filling out the same information time and time and time again. I don't yet know what the supplier information system will capture first off. So I will see it at the same time as everybody else will see it, and we'll figure that out. But as Go for Growth, we will be providing some guidance as soon as we're able to get access to it going forward. But what it should be is a useful tool, and at least it puts stuff in one place. Now, under threshold, what I said about if the opportunities you're looking for are below that threshold, we will still need to look at our individual potential clients' websites to understand what their processes are. And what I don't know is whether under threshold notices in terms of opportunity will be published on there, or whether Contracts Finder will be the search engine that continues. I'm assuming so, but we're just a little bit in terms of waiting to see what some of the direction of travel is. But of course, we will keep everybody posted. Let me just see if we've got anything in the Q&A. What was the term for the procedurals each organisation will take? So I think you mean the contract procedurals, CPRs. Not all local authorities even call them contract procedurals. Some will have different terminology for it. But on each website, if you look for their procurement page, what it should tell you is where to find what level of opportunity they're doing what process with. In local authorities, generally speaking, it's called contract procedurals, but it might be different for things like police forces, NHS, universities, etc. But my understanding is under transparency legislation, if you're doing something under threshold, effectively you will write down what it is that you do and you'll publish that so that the marketplace can see it. Hopefully that answers your question, Ian. And let me just say, many anchor organisations are aiming to spend more locally. Are the new regulations supportive of this goal? Absolutely. Local economic regeneration, again, isn't necessarily a new concept. And economic, I think inclusive economy, circular economy, all of those terminologies have been around for a while. What the Act is really reinforcing, and it does it as well through something called Meet versus Mat, which I'll tell you about. But the Act is really reinforcing accessibility and inclusivity, supplier diversity. And it's doing that through a number of conduits, the transparency regime being one of them, the National Procurement Policy Statement being another. So if you have a read of that, you'll see that what public sector is still tasked with doing, and it has grown in priority and stature, is to be open for business, proportionate in requirements, and to not just consider what the barriers to SMEs and VCSEs are, but also to take practicable steps where appropriate to remove those barriers. So things like when you're asked for insurance policies for a bid, you should be asked to self-certify that you will have that insurance in place for contract start date. If you are successful, you shouldn't be asked to have it in place for the bid. So if you need Cyber Essentials Plus or Information Assurance 27001, they take time to put in place, and there's also a cost to them. So it would be at contract start date or a date thereafter. You should see those things. Meet versus Mat that I mentioned, most economically advantageous tender is effectively what we award against in public sector. And what it can often feel like is that it's fastest race to the bottom on price. That's transitioned now already to Mat, most advantageous tender. And what that means is although Meet also looked at social value and environmental value, really that removing of that E for economic is a real message to the public sector that value is what we award on, the most advantageous tender in terms of value, and that could be subjective, so it wouldn't have to be cost related. So you'll see those weightings in 100% of a bid. You might have previously 60% price, 40% quality. You might see those things flipping. We are thinking that we'll see and are already seeing greater weightings on technical capability, social impact, with price sometimes not being evaluated at all or having a different weighting. So I think there's lots of reasons to be positive around being a small organisation supplying the public sector as it stands at the minute. So let me do a really super quick demonstration of Find a Tender. So hopefully you can now see Find a Tender service on the screen. If you can't, do let me know in the chat, but hopefully you can, because it won't work if you can't see what I'm showing you. So in Find a Tender service, and you can see the URL at the top, and it is a live link in the slide deck. I'm going to show you a super quick version. So you'll see here, there's a system notice. So we won't have Find a Tender from 5:30 p.m. on Friday, the 21st of February until midnight on the 23rd of February, ahead of the regulations going live. So I'm going to put consultancy in here. And I'm just going to click search. There's nothing else in here. The first thing we do is put a word in that describes, or a set of words. I usually try one to start with. What am I looking for? Consultancy. And hit search. Oh, something went wrong. That's great. Let's try this again. Do you know, I must have done these searches a million times and they always work. Isn't it typical? Consultancy. Right. Okay, so it's brought up anything that is either a pipeline, a future opportunity, a live opportunity, or an awarded contract with consultancy somewhere in the blurb. So actually 4,238 notices, I can't possibly go through them. So let me try and refine it. So I'm actually going to put procurement consultancy and see what that does to it. So actually that's made it worse, because now it's picking up anything with either procurement or consultancy in the blurb. If you click here, it will tell you how to do an advanced search. And effectively, if we want the search to pick up both words together in the search, we can put a plus sign between it and update the results. Well, that's brought it down to 1,271, but it's still a lot. So actually, if I want the search functionality to search for procurement consultancy as a sentence, procurement and then consultancy together, I'll put it in speech marks and then update the results. So we have 18 notices. I actually don't think I want to know about awarded contracts. That can be useful if you want to know who has awarded what and when for future planning. You might want to know what's coming up in pipeline. You might want to know what a future opportunity is, a pre-market engagement event. For the purposes of this search, I'll just click opportunity and update it, and it brings it down to 8. So I can now have a look at 8 notices. That feels like a reasonable amount to look at. So one of the foibles of Find a Tender service is I've just done a search on language. I can also refine it using a CPV code, and a CPV stands for Common Procurement Vocabulary. So it is the codes that we work on. And if I go in here and put the same in as my search, procurement consultancy, I can actually pick the code. And what that means is any notices that have got that code included in it, I will then see. So if I update that, I've now only got 2 notices that are actually looking at procurement consultancy services. And so I can have a look through those. That's much easier. First thing I might look at is what's the closing date? 28th of February. Well, that's not far away, 10 days away. But you'll notice there's this one that has a closing date of the 20th of January 2025. So it's actually gone past, although it is still saying that it's available. I'm trying to find out why Find a Tender service does that, but I see it really often that the date has already gone past, but it's called an FO2 notice. That is still live. Almost certainly we wouldn't be able to apply for that because the closing date has passed. So actually, what would be really useful for Contracts Finder is that if I have a live opportunity, it would only show me the things where the date has yet to go past, but it doesn't. So just bear that in mind. One of the first things to do would be to have a look at it. You can then click into it, and it would then take you through what it needs, all that you can express your interest. It'll send you to the portal. at the moment, it will send you to the procurement portal that you would need to go and get the documents from. If you want, you can put a region in. So if you were in London, you could click London. What I will say about the regions are, if the contract opportunity says that it's available anywhere in England, no matter what region you put in, it will show you it. So if it's a national contract, you will see all of those. You can put a value, minimum and maximum, in there if you only want to see things that's above below 500,000, for example. You can do that. And you can put a date range in. So if I say the publication date, if I put it from, I don't know, 1st of February to the 28th of February, it should only show me what was published within that date range, and that might help the results. But you've got a number of things that you can look at. You can also deselect notice type. So you can see a pipeline notice, a prior information notice, a contract notice. There's lots of them. I tend to just leave that as it is rather than deselect or select from the different types of notices in there. I also tend to leave CPV code blank, and personally I use a procurement the language search more than anything. Sometimes I might do what I've done in terms of adding the CPV code afterwards, but that will take you to an opportunity. So all the information is in there. It's being hosted on Intend, which is a procurement portal. So you can click through to that. If you're not registered to Intend, you would need to register. Then you can get all of your documents, and there's a bit more information about the opportunity down here. If there's any lots, it will tell you, etc. So effectively, Find a Tender Service is what it says on the tin. It's just helping you find a tender, and then you would go to the normal procurement portal for all the documents. As I've said, and I'll just click back over to the slides, what we'll wait to see is what it looks like once the central digital platform has gone live and how it differs in terms of functionality. But we will be doing that. So if you don't want to, we can. So final few things from me, things to ask yourself in terms of information. Some of these are going to sound super obvious, so forgive me, I'm not trying to teach people to suck eggs, but does the public sector buy what you're selling? Almost certainly the answer is going to be yes, it does, because public sector buys pretty much everything. However, the how it buys it might be important. So if you're selling, we used to work with an organisation in the very beginning of Go for Growth. One of the first organisations that came to us for support was a company called Ocean Saver. You might see their cleaning products in Sainsbury's, for example, and other supermarkets. But they were a subcontractor to a facilities management company in public sector. So when they were looking on things like Find a Tender and Contracts Finder for cleaning materials, it's often wrapped up into facilities management or a bigger contract. So sometimes, and that can be especially the case in community health and social care, sometimes what you're selling might be wrapped up into a larger family tree. And if you're struggling to find out how the public sector buys what you sell, please do get in touch with me, and I'll tell you how in a second, because we can try and help you work that out. If you wanted to contact the contracting authority, do you know who the decision maker is? Because it won't always be procurement. It's likely to be a service delivery lead, a commissioner of some sort. Do you know who that is? Do you have a relationship with them? And do you know where the contracting authority is in that contract cycle? So if they've just let a 4-year contract for recruitment services, for example, it's almost pointless asking about what opportunities they've got. Use that time to try and learn about the contracting authority, build a relationship so that you are in the mix and you have all of your ducks in a row for the next time it goes live. And then, so it was a previous head of procurement at Bradford Council that talked to us about how to approach the public sector. The approach needs to be intelligent, and by that I mean cold LinkedIn messages, cold emails rarely work. Buyers and commissioners will be getting hundreds, if not thousands of them. So we're thinking about actually what are the problem statements that your potential client are trying to solve. So if the problem statement they're trying to solve is they want all of their suppliers to be carbon net zero by a certain date, actually your approach might be about, I am one of those suppliers. How can I enable this? How can I help you with that? If we want to make Barnsley a digital centre for the country, never mind in Yorkshire, am I a business that can help you with that? And how can I help you with that? So thinking about those benefits and what you can supply to that public authority is the hook. And if you can, and it's not a fail safe, don't get me wrong, there are no guarantees with this stuff, but actually the more relevant your communication is, the better chance we've got of it landing. Some other things to consider. So social value is, we're all over it in the public sector. So thinking about creating new businesses, new jobs, new skills, tackling climate change, reducing waste, and being supportive and open for business so that we can create diversity and inclusivity in our supply chains, driving innovation and creating that resilience that I talked about. If you can understand what your impact can be socially, then that's a really good narrative that you can take to your potential client. Net zero carbon is becoming a much bigger priority. It's been trundling away there, actually fairly quietly in the background. What you'll start to see is contracting authorities thinking about their scope 3 purchase goods and services. Often that's where 80–90% of carbon emissions are. So they've been focusing on their scopes 1 and 2, what they control in their direct estate, and their indirect emissions from energy. But they'll start to think about scope 3. Now, already the legislation says any contract above 5 million will require a net zero reduction plan, a strategy. But we're seeing that in much lower value contracts. So as a business, think about what you're doing for net zero. Think about your scopes 1 and 2. Think about what your responsibilities are and how you can help. And then think about your market. So what's coming? How can you get on the front foot? The public sector should be doing market assessments to determine market health, capability and capacity. They should be being much more proactive in the coming months to improve supply diversity, that innovation and resilience. So we should see through that transparency regime much more opportunities to get involved. So have a think about those things. And then the last couple of slides are just contact details for Go for Growth. So it can feel like a lonely place when you're a small business, and especially if you're a sole trader or micro business, but you're not alone. Go for Growth is here to help. We are free at point of access for you because we're funded by our public sector partners who choose to invest in Go for Growth. So please don't feel there's a cost barrier to coming to us. We have some courses that you can take. Again, they're free of charge. Social value bid skills and one on the regulations. The links are live, so you can go to there. No registration is required. And you will get a certificate at the end of it. And if you would like to stay in touch with us, you can do through our newsletter. And that's it from me. Thank you for sticking with me for the last 43 minutes. We've cantered through a lot of information at a high level. So please do feel free to use those contact details if you want to have a more in-depth conversation with me, or if you've got any questions. I'll just see what we've got in the Q&A. So we mentioned lots. How are these advertised? So in a procurement, if there is a lot strategy that's being used, so you might have £500,000 worth of procurement consultancy that's being procured, but under that there might be bid writing, there might be social value consultancy, there might be health and safety consultancy, and they might be lots 1, 2 and 3. In that find a tender notice that I showed you, each lot should be referenced on there to tell you how many lots there are, and it will certainly be in the invitation to tender documents. And often you obviously don't have to bid for all of the lots. You can choose which lot you would like to bid for. That's usually how it works with lots. So it should be on the Find a Tender service or Contracts Finder notification. So you can see it at that point, but it will certainly be in the invitation to tender documents for any public sector opportunity. So let me just see what else we've got super quickly in the chat, if I can get it up. the previous slide briefly. What I'm going to do is send the slide deck out, if that's okay, but let me just pop it back up. So that should come up. So let me go back up. So was that the one that you were after in terms of signing up to Go for Growth newsletter? If not, if it was the contact details that you want or the courses, they will all be in there. Perfect. Thank you ever so much. We are at time, so thank you everyone for joining me. It will be hopefully today, if not at the very latest by close of play tomorrow when you get the recording and the slide deck. Please do feel free to get in touch in the meantime though. We are here to help, and if nothing else, have a really good rest of your Tuesday. Thank you everyone for joining. Bye now.